Matthew Raza, I'm not sure if I'm saying that name right, but Matthew Raza is a guy who has spent much of his he spent much of his academic career writing about a former president named Grover Cleveland. He says he has a message for Donald Trump and his supporters. Donald Trump is no Grover Cleveland. If Trump actually runs for president in 2024, he will be aiming to join Cleveland in the history books as just the second president to serve non-consecutive terms. There have been other presidents who have tried to pull that off. Um, Former President Martin Van Buren ran twice more after leaving office. He ran in 1844 and 1848, but lost both times. Millard Fillmore ran in 1856 and lost, and Ulysses S. Grant ran for a third term 4 years after the end of his 4 years at the end of his second, and then in 1880, and Theodore Roosevelt, after switching parties, gave it another whirl in 1912. But Cleveland alone was the only one that succeeded. He was first he was first elected in 1884. He lost a narrow, undisputed election to Benjamin Harrison in 1888, and then he staged a comeback, defeating Harrison in their 1892 rematch. Um, Trump is obviously thinking about trying to emulate that example, telling an audience last month at the Conservative Political Action Conference that he had actually won the 2020 election, which is of course false because he didn't, and adding, he says, I may even decide to beat them for a third time, which wasn't the third time he lost. 68% of CPAC attendees said that they want Trump to run for president again, which I don't, according to a Political Morning Consult poll last month. 54% of Republicans said that they would back Trump in the 2024 primaries. Even though I'm not a Republican, but I would still not back Trump either way, barring some unforeseen event that makes this prohibitively difficult or impossible, such as a felony conviction. Trump looks like the clearer GOP frontrunner in 2024, which is embarrassing. So it's instructive to compare Trump to the man he would join in the history books if he became president again in 2025, which hopefully he won't. Matthew Rosa wrote about Cleveland in his history master's thesis at Rutgers University, Newark, in the presidency, again, that will be the subject of my dissertation. Despite his notoriously phlegmatic personality, I almost felt like I know Cleveland personally. There is one word that explains why Trump is unworthy of the comparison: integrity. To make this clear, I certainly do not share Cleveland's political philosophy. He opposed women's rights to vote. He supported the racist Jim Crow laws in the post-Civil War South, and used the army to break up a nationwide railroad strike in 1894. He strongly opposed the rise of an American welfare state, and mainly viewed his presidential powers in a negative sense, in terms of vetoing legislation and restricting congressional power, rather than an affirmative or constructive one. In the literal definition of the word, Grover Cleveland was a conservative, but yet at least he was an authentic conservative and not a strictly self-serving opportunist like Trump. That's where he rises above Trump as both as a human being and a president, and not a good president necessarily, but by far a less evil one. But take Cleveland's loss in the 1888 election. He was the fourth of the 11 sitting presidents, including Trump, who have sought another term, and they had been defeated. Unlike Trump, the only president to try to stand power by overriding the will of the people, Cleveland actually won the popular vote, and there were even rumors at the time that he would have won the electoral vote as well, if not for fraud. Cleveland, however, had a lawyer's mind and immediately saw that there was no concrete evidence of chicanery. He won about 90,000 more votes than Harrison did, but in the much smaller electorate of that era, a margin of about 0.8, but accepted that he had lost the election fair and square according to the rules of the U.S. Constitution. It's difficult to stress that point enough, though. But less than a quarter century had passed since the end of the Civil War, and less than a dozen years later, since the contentious election of 1876, which also nearly caused the Civil War. If Cleveland had wanted to stir up his supporters with false claims that he had been robbed, it is conceivable that he would have succeeded. Instead, he accepted his fate as the third presidential candidate at the time to lose an election, despite winning the popular vote. You probably know that's what happened to Al Gore in 2000 and Hillary Clinton in 2016, before Cleveland had come Andrew Jackson in 1824 and Samuel Tilden in 1876. But on that front, the contrast could hardly be stark. And in both the 2016 and 2020 elections, Trump conditioned his supporters to believe that there were only two possibilities: he would win or the other candidate was cheating. He accused Ted Cruz of cheating when the Texas senator won the Iowa caucuses in 2016. The Republican primaries and falsely claimed that Hillary Clinton had won the popular vote in 2016 thanks to millions of illegal votes, which wasn't true. He tried to discredit the mail-in ballots prior to the 2020 election because polls showed that Democrats scared of the COVID-19 pandemic were more likely than the Republicans to vote by mail. Ironically, Trump tried to use this by cheating and by slowing down the postal service. After he lost to Joe Biden, Trump came up with any number of bogus claims to convince his sycophants and perhaps himself that he actually won, which he didn't. There's no point in listing all of Trump's lies, which range from saying illegal immigrants voted and asserting poll watchers weren't allowed to do their jobs, to actually suggesting voting machines were rigged. And for two reasons. First, Trump and his sycophants are gish galloping, attempting to overwhelm opponents with bad arguments, and second, because his arguments are self-evidently irrelevant and absurd, and they're irrelevant because Trump lost every single case that he brought to court, which he was trying to allege with voter fraud. But more than 90 federal and state judges, many of them Republicans and Trump appointees, had rejected his various legal challenges. Are we supposed to believe that all of these judges, Republicans along with Democrats, engaged in a giant conspiracy theory with Trump's own attorney general, Fat Fuck Barr, who investigated and rejected Trump's claims as well, along with the former squatter Mike Pence? But no objective or rational person would take Trump's hypothetical conspiracy theory seriously. But the main point I'm making here is that Cleveland, who's a genuine conservative, would never have done anything like this. This is not the only way in which Cleveland displayed integrity in ways that Trump has not, and likely never will. Whatever his philosophical failings, Cleveland was impeccably honest in his financial dealings, going out of his way to avoid even the appearance of ethical issues during his political career. Trump, by contrast, allowed more than 3,000 conflicts of interest to emerge during his administration, and obviously he tried to enrich himself through the Oval Office. But Trump has also been a notorious flip-flopper on policy positions, drastically shifting his views on everything from Obamacare and entitlement programs to immigration, and the LGBTQ rates and gun control. Cleveland, by contrast, was willing to risk his political career by taking bold stances on important issues, even if many of his fellow Democrats disagreed with him. When running for re-election in 1888, he focused the entire campaign on lowering tariffs. Although many Democrats supported the protectionism, 4 years later, he told Democrats that he supported a gold standard for Americans' currency instead of a bimetallic one, thumbing his nose at the party's agrarian ring, which wanted the free coinage of silver. As president, he tried to stop America from annexing the Kingdom of Hawaii because he imposed imperialism, even though seizing the islands was a popular move and Cleveland needed a political boost. It doesn't much matter whether Cleveland was right or wrong on the issues of tariff reform and silver coins. I think his anti-imperialism stance on the Hawaii issue was his finest hour. But what matters most is that Cleveland cared more about some issues than about his own ambitions. He definitely wanted to be president, and like most politicians, he was open to some degree of compromise. At the same time, there were certain principles he would not forfeit in the name of winning. Unlike Trump, there were lines that Cleveland would not cross. I could add many other points on the contrast between Cleveland and Trump, but Cleveland rose from poverty through hard work. Trump was born into wealth, dependent on his father and government programs for his business career, But Trump was born into wealth. He was dependent on his father, and he depended on his father and government programs for his business career. And Trump is notoriously fucking lazy. Cleveland could be patriotic, but to a fault. Trump cozies up with dictators that are hostile to America, like Russia's Vladimir Putin to North Korea's Kim Jong-un. The main takeaway here, though, is that Cleveland believed in the Constitution and conservative ideas. When he was elected to a second term in 1892, it was because he had convinced enough Americans that he was correct on the issues. He didn't whine like a little bitch about losing in 1888, and he did not lie about where he stood or debase himself through his misconduct. He was often wrong on the merits, especially by contemporary standards, but at least he was an honorable man who, for all his faults, deserves a much better historical fate than to be lumped in with Donald Trump.